Okay, so welcome to York Buddha Dharma. As hopefully everyone knows, we've been studying, cutting through spiritual materialism chapter by chapter, and John Baker, who can't be here tonight, originally edited it with Trungpa Rinpoche, so this is kind of the big shoes to fill kind of seat to sit in. Last week we had a really marvelous teaching on the 6 realms and a spirited discussion. And next week, CT tomorrow will teach the Bodhisattva path. So I have only recently engaged with this material, and it's a great privilege in my mind to be in a room with so many people who study directly with Rinpoche. One of the things that engagement brought was a deep desire to see John Baker teach this material, which I'm sure will happen sometime in the future. So what I would like to do is quote from the material with some observations, and then maybe we'll have some discussion, and then some snacks, which is like a key element of this Sangha. So he starts out by saying, one comes to an understanding and transcendence of ego by using meditation to work backward through the 5 skandhas. And the last development of the 5th skandha is the neurotic and irregular thought patterns which constantly flit across the mind. Many different kinds of thoughts develop, along with the monkeys hallucinating of the 6 realms: discursive thoughts, grasshopper-like thoughts, display-like thoughts, film show-like thoughts, etc. It is from this point of confusion that we must start, and in order to clarify the confusion, it would be helpful to examine the ideas of the 4 Noble Truths which constitute the first turning of the wheel of Dharma by the Buddha. The 4 Noble Truths are the truth of suffering, the truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the goal, and the truth of the path. We start with the truth of suffering, which means that we must begin with the monkey's confusion and insanity. We must begin to see the actuality of dukkha, a Sanskrit word which means suffering, dissatisfaction, or pain. Dissatisfaction occurs because the mind spins around in such a way that there seems to be no beginning and no end to its motion. Thought processes continue on, thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, thoughts of the present moment. This creates irritation. Thoughts are prompted by, and are also identical with, dissatisfaction. Dukkha, the constantly repeated feeling that something is lacking, incomplete in our lives. Somehow, something is not quite right, not quite enough. So we are always trying to fill the gap, to make things right, to find that extra bit of pleasure or security. The continuing action of struggle and preoccupation is very irritating and painful. Eventually, one begins to become irritated just by being me. So to understand the truth of dukkha is actually to understand mind's neurosis. We are driven here and there with so much energy. Whether we eat, sleep, work, play, whatever we do, life contains dukkha, dissatisfaction, pain. If we enjoy pleasure, we're afraid to lose it. We strive for more and more pleasure or try to contain it. If we suffer in pain, we want to escape it. We experience dissatisfaction all the time. All activities contain dissatisfaction or pain continuously. So, on a certain level, that seems simple, but I would like to also quote from the Profound Treasury to expand a little bit more on this idea, in which he says, the basic quality of suffering is that you cannot behave in the proper manner. The first glimpse of suffering is a sense of clumsiness. You are unable to coordinate your body, speech, and mind. That sense of complete clumsiness can be referred to as, quote, ape instinct, close quote. From suffering comes the notion of irritation. Because you are not quite in accordance with your environment, the world begins to attack you. You may sit in a very uncomfortable chair, which simply doesn't fit you, so you feel painfully cramped. You may step in some dog shit on the pavement, and suddenly you have no idea who to blame, the dog who shat, yourself, or the uncleanness of the city. There is an ongoing bewilderment or grudge against the world. You are supposed to say something to someone who attacks you, but you have created the inconvenience yourself, so you do not know what to do. Basically, any movement you make by not being aware creates suffering and pain. Losing track, losing context, losing a reference point of openness brings pain. Understanding suffering is very important. The practice of meditation is not designed to develop pleasure, but to understand the truth of suffering. And in order to understand the truth of suffering, one also has to understand the truth of awareness. When true awareness takes place, suffering does not exist. I found that to be a unbelievably powerful sentence. Through awareness, suffering is somewhat changed in its perspective. It is not necessarily that you do not suffer, but the haunting quality that fundamentally you are in trouble is removed. It's like removing a splinter. It might hurt, and you might still feel pain, but the basic cause of that pain, the ego, has been removed. So, I know that some people who have heard about Buddhism, perhaps in the media or in a way that doesn't involve study, have a negative association with it because Buddhists are always talking about suffering. For myself, I think that being aware of the suffering that's in my life, that even when I'm enjoying something, it probably has to come to an end, because all compounded things eventually come to an end, has been a gateway to doing something about it. And as long as I was unaware of the suffering, there was no way forward. So suffering for me, well, I'm not really in love with it, represents a way forward, not that I want to stay there, but it gives me something to work with. So, he says, as we discussed in the chapters dealing with spiritual materialism, many people make the mistake of thinking that since the ego is the root of suffering, the goal of spirituality must be to conquer and destroy ego. They struggle to eliminate ego's heavy hand, but as we discovered earlier, that struggle is merely another expression of ego. We go around and around trying to improve ourselves through struggle, until we realize that the ambition to improve ourselves is itself the problem. Insights come only when there are gaps in our struggle, only when we stop trying to rid ourselves of thought, when we cease siding with the pious, good thoughts against the bad, impure thoughts, only when we allow ourselves simply to see the nature of thought. So, this also spoke powerfully to me because I'm told that Rinpoche greatly admired Alan Watts, and that there were plans for him to teach at Naropa that were cut short by the end of Mr. Watts' life. But he makes elsewhere the argument that the ego is not inherently evil, but that it's when it's off leash that there's a problem. So for example, if I'm living with another person, it's useful for me to recognize my clothes so that when I get dressed to go to work in the morning, I'm wearing the correct thing. Last month, I was living in Brooklyn for a time near Grand Army Plaza, and I was on my way to the subway, and a really beautiful elderly couple came out of an apartment building, and the woman tried to get into a car, which was not her car. And in her defense, there were 3 silver Japanese 4-door sedans parked right next to each other. So this idea of me and mine, I think there's a difference between the verb transcend and the verb annihilate. And so if I can ever recognize the usefulness of my ego and keep it in its own place, which is not, I'm better than someone else, I need more stuff than someone else. Like I said, off-leash is a big problem, but ego itself is not fundamentally a problem. Or it's transcending rather than ridding myself of it, because I need it to get through embodied life. Further, he says, we begin to realize that there is a sane, awake quality within us. In fact, this quality manifests itself only in the absence of struggle. So we discover the third noble truth, the truth of the goal. That is, non-striving. We need only drop the effort to secure and solidify ourselves, and the awakened state is present. But we soon realize that just letting go is only possible for short periods. We need some discipline to bring us to letting be. We must walk a spiritual path. Ego must wear itself out like an old shoe, journeying from suffering to liberation. So let us examine the spiritual path, the practice of meditation, and the fourth noble truth. Meditation practice is not an attempt to enter into a trance-like state of mind, nor is it an attempt to become preoccupied with a particular object. There has developed, both in India and Tibet, a so-called system of meditation, which might be called concentration. That is to say that this practice of meditation is based on focusing the mind on a particular point so as to be better able to control the mind and concentrate. In such practice, the student chooses an object to look at, think about, or visualize, and then focuses his entire attention upon it. In so doing, he tends to develop by force a certain kind of mental calm. I call this kind of practice mental gymnastics because it does not attempt to deal with the totality of any given life situation. It's based entirely on this or that, subject and object, rather than transcending the dualistic view of life. So, to this point, I had the very good fortune to sit with Changling Rinpoche at Westchester Buddhist Center a few weeks ago, including some of my most beloved teachers here, and one of them was shocked by his statement that shamatha is not meditation. I had actually heard this elsewhere, so I wasn't shocked. But the angle that he was working was that shamatha is a meditation technique. And so, all of us right now are being bombarded by electromagnetic radiation from satellites. We're bathing in it all the time. But if we want to receive a TV signal, we need a satellite dish to concentrate that signal on a single point, and then we can receive the broadcast. So in the same way, before I can engage in any other techniques of meditation, like analytical meditation, or looking into perhaps the deep and true nature of reality, it would be great if I had a useful tool. In other words, if I'm going to chop wood, I need a sharp axe, not a rock, or I'm not going to get anywhere. So I thought that was really interesting as well. He further says, so the practice of shamatha is not a bad idea, but it's a tool that's to be put to other use, not an end in and of itself. Is the way I read that. The practice of samadhi, on the other hand, does not involve concentration. This is very important to realize. Concentration practices are largely ego reinforcing, although not purposely intended as such. Still, concentration is practiced with a particular aim and object in mind, so we tend to be centralized in the heart. We set out to concentrate upon a flower, stone, or flame, and we gaze fixedly at the object, but mentally we are going into the heart as much as possible. We are trying to intensify the solid aspect of form, the qualities of stability and stillness. In the long run, such a practice could be dangerous. Depending on the intensity of the meditator's willpower, we might become introverted in a way which is too solemn, fixed, and rigid. This sort of practice is not conducive to openness and energy, nor to a sense of humor. It is too heavy and could easily become dogmatic, in the sense that those who become involved in such practices think in terms of imposing discipline upon themselves. We think it necessary to be very serious and solemn. This produces a competitive attitude in our thinking. The more we can render our minds captive, the more successful we are, which is a rather dogmatic, authoritarian approach. This way of thinking, always focused on the future, is habitual with ego. I would like to see such and such results. I have an idealized theory or dream which I would like to put into effect. We tend to live in the future, our view of life colored by the expectation of achieving an ideal goal. Because of this expectation, we miss the precision and openness and intelligence of the present. We are fascinated, blinded, and overwhelmed by the idealized goal. So personally, this has been a big problem for me, in that I would like to be a better meditator. And so there is a paradox in play that in order to deepen my ability, I need to be able to judge, has my attention left the breath or not, and I need to bring it back to the breath. And Theravada teacher that I really admire says, that actually staying on the breath is a good thing, but it's not the point for someone like me that's a beginner. The point is learning how to bring the attention back with compassion. So every time, I used to, even more so than now, beat myself up every time I went off the breath, and like, oh, I screwed up again, I screwed up again, I screwed up again. And that period, thankfully, is starting to abate. And now it's kind of neutral. It's like, oh, I'm off the breath again, I'm gonna come back. And that feels better. But again, I don't have a poster at home where I mark on this day, I actually stopped hating myself for my bad meditation practice. So, he continues, inasmuch as real meditation practice is a way to step out of ego, notice he said step out of ego, not destroy ego, because you can step back in when that's handy. The first point is to not focus yourself too much upon the future attainment of the awakened state of mind. The whole practice of meditation is essentially based upon the situation of this present moment, here and now, and means working with this situation, this present state of mind. Any meditation practice concerned with transcending ego is focused on the present moment. For this reason, it is a very effective way to live. If you are completely aware of your present state of being and the situation around you, you cannot miss a thing. We may use various meditation techniques to facilitate this kind of awareness, but these techniques are simply a way of stepping out of ego. Technique is like a toy given to a child. When the child grows up, the toy is discarded. In the meantime, technique is necessary in order to develop patience and refrain from dreaming about the spiritual experience. One's whole practice should be based on the relationship between you and nowness. I think that's really wonderful. It seems clear to me anyways. So he says, then you begin to find the understanding of the truth of the path, the fourth noble truth, simplicity, such as the awareness of walking. First you become aware of standing, then you're aware that your right leg is lifting, swinging, touching, pressing. Then the left leg is lifting, swinging, touching, pressing. There are many, many details of action involved in the simplicity and sharpness of being in this very moment, here, now. And it is the same with the practice of awareness of breathing. You become aware of the breath coming into your nostrils, going out, and finally dissolving into the atmosphere. It is a very gradual and detailed process, and accurate, acute precision is involved with its simplicity. If an act is simple, then you begin to realize its precision. One begins to realize that whatever we do in everyday life is beautiful and meaningful. This idea has helped me recently open up my sense of what meditation practice is, because I think that sitting on a cushion is absolutely essential, and on days when my schedule prevents it from happening, I don't have to get too many hours into my day before I notice an enormous difference. However, I have in the past been a little bit more committed to the practice of training at the gym, and there's a New York Sports Club location at 94th Street, which is downstairs, and I find it endlessly amusing in a way that's not in the least bit neat to people, that people will spend a good deal of time on a structured workout and then take the elevator back up to Broadway instead of taking the stairs. And so it makes me think, as important as my sitting meditation practice is, its true importance is when I'm having a conflict at work or somebody cuts me off when I'm commuting, and I'm sufficiently present and aware of myself and my care for that other being, regardless of what's going on with them, that I'm not reactive. That's the money. That's where the payoff is. I'm sitting on the cushion, and then I collect. It's like depositing money in the bank and then collecting the interest on it. He continues, the process of communication can be beautiful if we see it in terms of simplicity and precision. Every pause made in the process of speaking becomes a kind of punctuation. Speak, allow space. Speak, allow space. It does not have to be a formal and solemn occasion necessarily, but it is beautiful that you are not rushing, that you are not talking at tremendous speed raucously. We do not have to churn out information and then stop suddenly with a feeling of letdown in order to get a response from the other person. We could do things in a dignified and proper way. Just allow space. Space is as important in communicating to another person as talking. You do not have to overload the other person with words and ideas and smiles all at once. You can allow space, smile, say something, and then allow a gap, and then talk, and then space, punctuation. Imagine if we wrote letters without any punctuation. The communication would be very chaotic. You do not have to be self-conscious and rigid about allowing space. Just feel the natural flow of it. So, remarkably, that's the end of the chapter. And I think one of the beautiful things about it is that it's only about 8 pages long, and it's in some ways a connector between the realms and the Bodhisattva path, which we'll enjoy next week. But then there's as many pages of questions and answers as there were the chapter itself. And I'll share a few of those just because I think in the answers, he's expanding what he mentioned in the chapter, and then we can have discussion. It's not super likely that I'll be able to answer questions, but I'm happy to facilitate them. So, someone says, can you say something more about allowing gaps to appear? I understand what you mean, but I do not understand how they come about, how someone allows a gap. How does one let be? The answer is, actually, this question leads into the next topic, the discussion of the Bodhisattva path, the Mahayana path of compassion and freedom, the white path. However, to answer the question from the Hinayana point of view of simplicity, one should be completely satisfied with whatever situation arises and not look for entertainment from an external source. Generally, when we speak, we do not simply want to communicate to the other person, but we want a response as well. We want to be fed by the other person, which is a very egocentric way of communicating. We have to give up this desire to be fed, and then the gap automatically comes. We cannot produce the gap through effort. And so I thought that was a really amazing answer because in my mind it speaks to both clinging and a lack of equanimity. So I'm not just sharing my thoughts with you on this, but I want you to like me. That would be egoic. Or he says, we need to not look for entertainment from an external source. To me, that speaks to the cultivation of equanimity, that we're all here, and that's beautiful, and it's fine, and there doesn't need to be anything more than us just sitting together. So the other question that spoke to me was, how does one deal with practical life situations while trying to be simple and experience space? And he says, you see, in order to experience open space, one must experience the solidity of earth and form. They are interdependent. Often we romanticize open space, and then we fall into traps. As long as we do not romanticize open space as a wondrous place, but rather relate that space to earth, then we will avoid these traps. Space cannot be experienced without the outline of the earth to define it. If we're going to paint a picture of open space, we must express it in terms of the earth's horizon. So it is necessary to bring oneself back to the problems of everyday life, the kitchen sink problems. That is why the simplicity and precision of everyday activities is very important. If you perceive open space, you should bring yourself back to your old, familiar, claustrophobic life situations and look into them more closely, examine them, absorb yourself into them, until the absurdity of their solidity strikes you and you can see their spaciousness as well. And this spoke to me of teachings I've received elsewhere that have been super useful about just living everyday life in a way that's more purposeful. So if I'm doing the dishes, just do the dishes. Don't be daydreaming about what horrible thing could be happening at work. Don't worry about what I heard on CNN. just wash the dishes, and then I'm less likely to drop them or break them or whatever. But then can be completely involved with that activity until it's time to do the next activity. And again, I have not as much time as I would like to do formal practice, but expanding my idea of what consists of practice has been helpful. So the final question is, I experience calm thoughts as well as neurotic thoughts. Are these calm thoughts something I should cultivate? In the practice of meditation, all thoughts are the same. Pious thoughts, very beautiful thoughts, religious thoughts, calm thoughts, they are all still thoughts. You do not try to cultivate calm thoughts and suppress so-called neurotic thoughts. This is an interesting point. When we speak of treading the path of the Dharma, which is the fourth noble truth, it does not mean we become religious, calm, or good. Trying to be calm, trying to be good, is also an aspect of striving, of neuroticism. Religiously inclined thoughts are the watcher, the judge, and confused worldly thoughts are the actor and the doer. For instance, if you meditate, you might experience ordinary domestic thoughts, and at the same time, there's a watcher saying, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you should come back to meditation. These pious thoughts are still thoughts and should not be cultivated. I think that's really interesting, because one of the teachers at the retreat, which I just did at the IMS, spoke about allowing the nervous system to settle, and how that was the first half of the retreat was going to be different from the second half in that way. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. So I'm not necessarily trying to cleanse my mind of thoughts, but if I could just pay attention, they might settle down of their own accord. But as long as I'm trying to force it, it's not going to go anywhere. Or then I'll get more agitated forcing thoughts. So I'm grateful for your attention, and we have some more time before snacks. Anybody want to share any thoughts?
I really like the part where you said, the Rinpoche talked about space and allowing space and gaps in between sentences. And he was just a master at that. And if you watch any of the videos of him on YouTube, he'll first look around the room, scan the room. Then he might smile. Then he might lift up his glass and take a sip of his beverage. And then he might start to speak. But everything was so slow. There was absolutely no speed. And in all the years that I knew him, I never saw any indication of speed whatsoever. And even when he was doing a flower arrangement or tea ceremony, whatever activity he was doing, there was so much space around it. And when there's no speed, there's no aggression. Total lack of no aggression at all surrounding him. And I think that teachers teach in all these subtle ways, the way what they say, the teachings, the way they behave, the way they look, just the whole environment around them is all teaching if we tune into that. Thank you for your talk. It was excellent. We appreciate it.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. It makes me think about an experience I've had in the last year or so, which is that I used to rush around trying to get a lot of different things done. And I had problems with being late, and now I find not only am I being a little bit more conservative in terms of leaving space in between things, but I'm completely at ease. If something goes wrong with the subway, I'll get off the subway, get on a city bike. If something goes wrong with that, one of my other teachers recommends the practice of adaptability. But I find out more often than not, I show up within a minute or two of when I intended to be there. And the means by which I achieve that can be something that I couldn't possibly imagine when I left. So this idea of practicing calm, not slowness, but just like determinism, like just now it's time to do this, now it's time to do that, and then somehow everything flows in a way that it never did before, which was a lot more energy for working on other things.
I think what you're talking about is precision. And when we have an awareness, space starts to happen. Is that on?
Yeah, just closer, a little
Oh.
closer.
Well, it's further away from me, more space. And so it's a very interesting point, because I know that precision is actually a very tricky thing to have, because you can become very neurotic without being very precise. We can be very lazy without precision. But according to the space that we see, we're able to become more precise, just because it sort of becomes choices. And I mean, I personally been feeling tremendous claustrophobia as I moved recently. And there was sort of I felt like I cut through recently, because I allowed space to happen. And it's like so different. And but space is so important. People don't understand that. I mean, in conversations, most times I find that the biggest problem that exists is that people don't give each other space. So it's hard to have listening, and if you don't have space and you can't be precise about what someone else is saying, and listening, I think, only comes about space as well.
Absolutely. I think precision is a very beautiful word, and one of the more useful teachings that I received was at the end of a yoga retreat. Somebody was speaking to us on how to re-enter everyday life, having been together for like 6 or 7 days. And I'm not sure how it was intended, but I know it was super useful to me. They said, if you like what happened here, examine your everyday life and try to imagine ways where you can make them more like one another. And so I think that if I have a cluttered apartment, or things are not arranged well, and I'm being abusive to myself, if I'm being judgmental and saying I'm a bad person because I have a dirty apartment and I need to clean it up, that's one thing. But if the retreat experience shows me how easily and effortlessly I can flow through my life when it's not obstructed by all my stuff, then tidying up and being more precise about this is what I do in the morning. I go in the kitchen, I make a cup of tea, and so on. But like, you see what I mean? The intention of egoic judging is different from the intention of making things easier on me and on others around me. Like everything else, it expands. Sir.
I really appreciated what Trooper Rinpoche was saying, and what you were elaborating on the subject of just having more appreciation for one's various thought patterns, and not to relate to them so negatively. I can't say I'm at the place where I really appreciate them, but I'm definitely more neutral. I'm not pushing them away so much. It's so easy for us to forget that samsara and nirvana are inseparable. We need this. This is material for us. Gurdjieff used to say that everything is material, everything is workable. Then there's similarly there's the idea. I think it comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm not sure that no mud, no lotus. Right?
Yes, I've actually heard that recently. Interesting. Yeah, and again, to return to the quote from the Profound Treasury, when he says, when there is true awareness, there is no suffering. So, flip that upside down, and suffering is a lack of true awareness, or avidya in Sanskrit. I don't know the Tibetan word, but I'm sure I will someday. Which, again, this goes on and on and on. I had the good fortune to sit across town at the New York Insight Meditation Center, and people were talking about suffering. Like, how am I supposed to just ignore this? Does equanimity mean I'm okay with the fact that somebody over there is being harmed? And it's like, it's on a certain level, it's very simple. Just be aware of what's going on in the present moment, and then it gets more complicated. That person could very well be suffering. It's not for me to say, if you just understood your situation better, you wouldn't be suffering. It's not how it works, as it turns out. But I think I need to work with my own suffering first. And I've got plenty of ignorance, so it's not coming out this month, I don't think. Anybody else?
Thank you so much for illuminating so many beautiful insights that was in that material. And a couple of things that I found interesting was you're speaking about the neurotic mind, and that is a source of suffering. And the way that the mind breaks up reality, for lack of a better word, into these ideas of this and that, and into duality, and what is and what isn't, creates a sense of stress. And I think, I don't remember exactly how it was stated, but basically the way I'm just throwing it back was what we think in this terms of duality, of naming things, doesn't reconcile with the way things really are. It doesn't, I think he said, doesn't match up. And in that matching up, there's a sense of dis-ease that's pervasive. And that's that Viparana dukkha. It's just always there, that existential yeah. And then you pointed out that in awareness, there is no suffering. But that's a very particular type of awareness. That's just a sense of, that's just a being without the division of the language and the thought that breaks it up. It's just being in that here, now presence. And in that, without the thought of a problem, you just can't find it. And that looking, I agree with what you're saying, is I think, the essence of meditation. I get caught on the samadhi aspect of it all the time, that I want to be a better meditator, I'm not good enough at it, I'll never get this right. It seems to be a competition with myself and with other people. Not that you can actually, score anybody, but in my own mind, I'm thinking, gee, he's so good at it. Look at this guy, he can sit here for hours, go to all these retreats, and I just can't. And it seems to get to a point where it's no longer productive for me. And I'm better off just letting that go. Not to say that I should do, a few minutes or 20 minutes or whatever each day, just to keep that edge to do the other things, to go into that awareness throughout the day, to give that little bit of a, keep the fitness there. But it's a toy, it's a tool, and it's not the way. It's just wonderful. There's so much in that those pages that you elucidated. So I'm grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I have two responses to that. One of them would be, again, the opportunity for practice off the cushion. I'm much more aware of when anger is arising in my mind than I was before. 10 years ago, there was no, speaking of non-duality, I was angry. But that's actually not the case. I'm Tim, and anger is arising, which is a completely different construct, and it's workable. Rinpoche talks again and again about space, and this allows the space not to, denigrate myself and say I shouldn't be angry, but just say, oh, anger is arising, or a coworker gets a promotion at work, and I'm supposed to be working on joy with others, and it's like, I didn't get a toy, except I wasn't supposed to get a toy. I was in line for a toy, I'm not that person, blah, blah, blah. But every time I observe something like this in my own mind, and I bring my mind back to my heart, that feels to me like progress. Not scoreable, but notable. And the other thing that I would say, if it's possible to say it as an observation and not a judgment, is that I'm pretty sure I was raised in a Western materialist, consumerist culture. And so before anybody asked my permission, I was conditioned to always judge myself against other people as a way of selling me stuff. Like, your car's not good enough, your clothes are not nice enough, your house is not big enough, whatever. And I would love to say that I've transcended that, and I haven't. But at least I'm aware of it. And everybody else who was raised in this culture it's already in there. It's not your fault. I don't think anybody was born with that. But regardless of whether we're born with it or not, it's a factor in everyday life. And every time I'm aware of that, and I say, oh, I really wish my thing was as nice as that, I'm like, really? I don't care. But it's a reactive, it's a habitual conditioned reaction. And every time I let go of one of those, it feels like a win for that present moment.
Well, just to expand on what you just said, we all have in terms of karma, we all have our own individual karma that we were born into. Then we have our family karma that we inherited, and we have the karma of like our neighborhood, our city, our country, and then the karma of the world that we live in, and then the universe. So the karma of whatever you were conditioned to believe in your city where you lived, your family, that was the karma that you inherited as your family karma, let's say, close to you. And then as practitioners, then we get the have good fortune of then to try to understand what we want to hold close to us and what we want to maybe let go of. And that's how we work with ourselves. And also the suffering really always comes from not the situation, but centralizing into ourself, into a self. Because every single thing that we observe and every single thing that we see, immediately after, let's say, the initial shock, immediately it's always about us centralizing into ourselves, how that affects us. And I think that's the big, the big thing that we have to work with. Is even noticing how we do that constantly. That creates a tremendous amount of suffering.
It's actually, John, on multiple occasions, which says to me that it's pervasive in the teachings. It talks about stories of the past and stories of the future, and how that's a place where our mind can flee the present moment. Not because it feels better, but because it's like what I'm in the habit of doing. But like imagining, oh, what if I'd been born in a different place? What if I had different parents? What if blah, blah, blah? It's like, at least the future, perhaps by making good choices in this present moment, I can have an effect on the future. But the past is completely not available. It's so not a place that I should be spending energy, and yet I have the ability to indulge in those daydreams if I'm not careful. It's 8:30. Anybody else? Snacks? Snacks? Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Dedicated by this merit, may
Ordain omniscience, may it be the enemy of wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of obey sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara may it free all beings, by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of Rigman's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant